Excellent. How are the opponents at once free and subject to laws they have not agreed to? Here's where he starts to go off the tracks. I retort, the question's wrongly put. The citizen gives his consent to all the laws, including those which are passed in spite of his opposition, and even those which punish him when he dares to break any of them. You can sort of see that. Suppose you think that the speed limit should be 70, and we pass a law that says the speed limit is 65. You're doing 76, and you get a ticket for doing 11 miles an hour over the speed limit. You can't say, yeah, but for me, the speed limit's 70. Because I've seceded. I've seceded from the speed limit. I'm only in at the 70. The cop's going to think you're drunk, and it's going to be worse for you. Don't do that. So we are, in fact, bound by laws, even those that we do not consent to. That's the price of participating in a democracy. The question, though, is that a price that you want to pay on issue after issue? And this is where Rousseau reveals what really underlies this. When in the popular assembly a law is proposed, what the people is, note the singular, is, what the people is asked, is not exactly whether it approves or rejects the proposal, but whether it's in conformity with the general will, which is their will. When therefore the opinion that is contrary to my own prevails, this proves neither more nor less than that I was mistaken. Holy Kapowski. There's no loyal opposition here. You were mistaken. What I thought to be the general will was not so. In fact, if my particular opinion had carried the day, I should have achieved the opposite of what was my will. And it's in that case that I should not have been free. That's terrifying. You read that, you should hear the slam of bolts in carbines and the tramp of hobnailed boots on the street. Pol Pot's favorite book. Rousseau, Social Contract. Actually an attempt to implement. In a world where this is true, where this is the definition of democracy, where we decide the right thing to do by using the vote to discover the general will. How many parties do we need? One. What is opposition to the party? Well, you have two choices. It could be treason, or it could be insanity. And in the former Soviet Union, it was often very hard to tell the difference. The insane asylums were the prisons, and the prisons were the insane asylums. So insanity was opposition to the party, or treason was opposition to the party, because when the opinion that is contrary to my own prevails, it means neither more nor less than that I was mistaken. So that concept of democracy is logical. I want to make sure that you understand that's not an absurdity. You may disagree with it, but that's clearly a logical conception of democracy. The actions of government are driven by the people, and the general will is sovereign. You don't get to disagree. You can disagree in private. You can harbor disagreements, but you cannot express them. There's no need for two parties. After all, there's only one general will. And the general will is the sovereign. The general will sits on the throne and wears the crown. It's an anthropomorphic conception, admittedly. It's hard to find it. But it's there. And we just use voting procedures to discover its will. All those countries with People's Democratic Republic of something are not perversions of democracy, but rather its embodiment. Democracy in and of itself is an attractive concept that must constitute a recipe for tyranny, unless the scope of collective sovereignty is strictly limited. A quote from Che Guevara, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but notice at the end it says, what is more important is that people become more aware every day of the need to incorporate themselves into society. We owe ourselves to society. Society owns our bodies. Well, is it true democracy means rule by the people, it's the best form of government? Are the many wiser than any one person? I think we often hear that. It would be remarkable if that were true. But Aristotle said that the group are wiser, even though many of the individuals, one of whom is a sound man, taken individually, knows. So how do we decide criminal cases? We have one smart person or 12 jurors? Well, by and large, we have jurors. How many of you ever saw I Want to Be a Millionaire and are willing to admit it? There you go. Standing up for what's wrong. Well, what was the best lifeline on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Ask the audience. Well, it depends who the friend was. Consistently, if you have a smart friend, yes. But consistently, the best one was ask the audience. Now, these are people who not only are watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, they stood in line so they could sit there in the dark and watch Regis Philbin do whatever that was that he did. They're not the cream of society. If some of y'all have been, I'm sorry, and I mean that, I really am sorry. They're not the cream of society, and yet, when you ask them as a group, because they're registering independently their view on this A, B, C, or D, the plurality winner of that four-way multiple choice was almost always correct. Whereas if you had asked any one individual, you're better off calling your friend. There's a book called The Wisdom of Crowds that many of you may have seen. Under some circumstances, a crowd can be a cybernetic wisdom-creating machine. But the circumstances are restricted, and statistically they require independence. Requires independence. That is, each opinion is registered independently. It's not tainted in order to be able to use the binomial distribution in order to generate the power of that prediction. We don't do that. We all watch the same show. CNN, Fox News, whoever you listen to, Al Franken. We don't do it independently. We all have the same information source, and then we go and talk about it. I'm going to have to skip the bridge because I didn't load the movie. Well, what's the basis of disagreement? Some disagreements are chocolate versus vanilla. Remember that the problem that we're working on is, suppose we disagree. What is the status of the people who disagree with you? Are they mistaken? Or are they allowed to have that view? If we're trying to decide about chocolate versus vanilla, what are we all going to eat? First question you ask, because you've heard this lecture, is, why do you think there's a we? Why can't I have chocolate and you have vanilla? Why do we all have to eat the same thing? But okay, for some reason we do. There's some reason why we all have to have the same policy. So we deliberate. And the process of deliberation gives us what? I persuade you, I really do like chocolate better. And you persuade me, you really do like vanilla better. It's difficult for us to talk about fundamental values, be they religious or political, in a persuasive way. I'm not going to persuade you that your basic religious values are wrong. Nor will you persuade me that mine are, except in some cases. I mean, you certainly get conversions. Most people, though, have thought about this. Arguing about it's probably not going to help. On the other hand, there are many questions where there are just different information sets. Suppose I am worried about the problem of prison overcrowding, and you are worried about the problem of prison overcrowding, and we disagree about what the solution is. Well, that argument admits of the use of evidence, because we're talking about means-end relationships. And when we talk about it, if we both want the same thing, which is reducing overcrowding in the prison, it makes some sense to deliberate. The question is, how many times are discussions, committee hearings in Congress, sort of a charade where you trot out the chocolate versus vanilla disagreements and both sides get to have chocolate, 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 vanilla, 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 and nothing's really accomplished except you get to be on C-SPAN, which is worth like $1 on eBay.